Now at 6, night one of the Republican National Convention. Comprehensive coverage as party leaders make their case for 4 more years of a Trump presidency. It is the first night of the RNC, and we are joined by KTLA 5's panel of political analysts.
Political consultant and analyst Matt Klink and civil rights attorney and policy advisor Sonja Diaz. And
Sonja, a convention for an incumbent president can be challenging in the best of times. A very popular name. Most voters have a firm view of where they stand on the president and his performance. But this president comes into a convention week with a backdrop of a deeply divided country and the twin threats of a pandemic and a struggling economy. His opportunity this week to control the narrative, at least for the next week.
Well, the real opportunity for Trump and the Republican Party is that they're coming in second. So they already know what the Democratic National Committee said last week during their convention and can add to not policy, but values. American values and the way that the Republican Party, particularly President Trump and his family, see a future under Vice President Biden. And I think that that means that they will be presenting a stark picture, using terminology and a vision that America will not sustain itself if VP Biden and Senator Kamala Harris were elected, and that he, Trump, alone is the key to getting through the coronavirus. Now, as we saw last week, various speakers make clear that America is at a crossroads, that too many people are facing infection and the unnecessary loss of life. I believe that President Trump is going to assert that he has done the best job, that his travel restrictions were right on time, and that he was a proponent of masks throughout this pandemic. So I hope that we will have fact-checking in real time, but I suspect that he will promulgate a future of America that is better than that of something under the auspice of VP Biden.
And Sonja, we just heard the president with this thought. Let's play it first, and then I want to hear your reaction about taking the election away. Let's hear.
The only way they can take this election away from us is if this is a rigged election. Don't let them take it away from you. Don't let them take it away.
Sonja, your reaction to that.
President Trump's allegations that vote by mail and universal vote by mail are somehow fraudulent and unsafe are baseless. These are a new contemporary part of an attack on the right to vote, particularly the right to vote for voters of color. That is not only a historical trend in this country, but something that has been made possible and accelerated in states like Arizona, Texas, Florida, and Georgia after the U.S. Supreme Court gutted Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act under Shelby County. Our research at UCLA, including research from the Voting Rights Project, has made clear that vote by mail is safe. It also leaves a paper trail, which is counter to any claims of it being fraudulent, and is widely used by the electorate that tends to be older, more affluent, and white. And so the president has said that vote by mail is fraudulent. We've seen all of the things happening to the United States Postal Service, but there also seems to be a tendency to equate the fact that Democrats that are polled seem to want to vote by mail at twice the rate as Republican voters who are polled. That is unique because we are in a global pandemic where it is unsafe to be in close physical distances with other people without protective gear. We also know that our polling workers and volunteers tend to be elderly people, like my neighbor Helene right across the hall, and they simply can't do this job in November, and we need to keep everybody safe. So it comes as no surprise that vote by mail, something that is tried and true, is somehow going to be the demise of the American democracy.
So, Sonja, does she reach out to, I mean, the first thing that she said really was that she's a mom and a proud Latina. Does she reach out to those people that aren't in his base right now with that kind of speech?
Well, we saw this from the RNC chairwoman, who made no mention of her famous uncle, and instead identified herself as a housewife, despite the fact that she runs one of the biggest operations in the country, which is the Republican National Committee. We've heard a lot from President Trump about housewives and how that is different than women who are in the workforce, and that America being great is something that should really be preserving the nuclear family. Now, what we know from the policies about this city on a hill is that we are in the middle of absolute chaos. Over 175,000 Americans have died due to coronavirus pandemic, ineffectiveness of leadership here in this country that starts at the White House and trickles down to all of our leaders across this country. The other thing that's really clear is that despite gains that the Trump administration and Republican Party may want to say and assert were made in Wall Street and in the stock market, there still are a swath of Americans who are having trouble paying rent, having trouble putting food on the table, having trouble affording high-speed internet access for their children to go to work. And what we know is that there are more unemployment claims, over 55 million, than we've ever seen in this country. And that is Americans out of work since March. And this is more than the Great Recession, which President Obama and VP Biden inherited from President G.W. Bush. So we're talking about this idea of a city on a hill, a beacon of light, the American promise, the fact that America is great. And the RNC is going to continue to hammer home that message while providing this chaotic semblance of what a world would be like under the leadership of VP Biden. That said, there's no mention of the coronavirus pandemic and the loss of work that so many Americans are grappling with as we are forced to stay home so that we don't unnecessarily threaten other people's life.
Night one of the Republican National Convention, a night when we saw speeches from former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley in what may be a preview message of a potential run for president herself in 2024. We heard from the president's son, Don Trump Jr., who spoke for the better part of 10 minutes and began and ended with the economy. And there you saw at the end South Carolina Senator Tim Scott, again, heavy on tax cuts and the economy.
Heavy on tax cuts, the economy, on women, on diversity. We do want to welcome back our panelists. And of course, we have political consultant Matt Klink and also civil rights attorney and founding director of the UCLA Latino Policy and Politics Initiative, Sonja Diaz. And let's start with you, Sonja. We ended here with Tim Scott. We also heard from Maximo Alvarez. Did you feel, and Kimberly Guilfoyle, did you feel that the Trump campaign was trying to hit hard on the Latino vote and also for those that are undecided and independence of the Latino vote?
I think that there was clear pandering from both Black and Latino speakers at the RNC tonight that had ideas such as, I know socialism because I'm from Puerto Rico, and that's simply factually incorrect. Puerto Rico is part of the United States of America. It is a colony. I apologize, my dog is in the background. And we also know from Senator Tim Scott, he essentially was the only speaker who really talked about policy and made a case for conservatism. And we saw from others, whether it was the Guatemalan sisters talking about her mom coming from Guatemala, which is a country that is the recipient of international wars and attacks on its sovereignty because of the United States of America. And we also know that it is one of 3 countries in the Central American Triangle that has seen an influx of migration and refugees fleeing economic devastation, fleeing criminal organizations, some of which were taught how to be good criminals here in the United States, including here in Los Angeles. So it was very confusing, if I can be candid, but there was a sense that America's diversity breeds opportunity. And it was in some ways doublespeak, if you will, because the policies promulgated by the Trump administration have not been policies that are indicative of genuine economic opportunity. Most certainly that's the case with the coronavirus pandemic today when people are out of work and simply cannot pay their rent or mortgage.
Sonja, a chance for you to weigh in on the Secretary of State Mike Pompeo issue. He's breaking, as we've said, with decades of diplomatic decorum. There's talk of him potentially running himself in 2024. He'll have the platform of the Trump base. He'll be speaking largely to evangelicals with a backdrop in Jerusalem. Is this speech for President Trump, or is it for Mike Pompeo?
Well, I think that the RNC convention is about making President Trump comfortable and ready for a campaign that is going to be arduous amidst his failed leadership around the coronavirus pandemic. Having the Secretary of State Pompeo participate in this unprecedented way comes a night after former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley, who also probably has eyes on 2024. So this is really interesting because it provides a foil of two foreign policy experts and leaders from the Republican Party who are making a play for the highest office in the land while being surrogates for President Trump amidst a time when America is not a friend of Europe and not a friend of the Far East. And in fact, you know, with our handling of the coronavirus pandemic, our real only peer is Brazil, and that is not a place to be. So I think that this is fascinating. It is a competition. One may scratch their head as to why people are taking the stump, but I think that it's really about getting the nomination after the cycle.
Sonja, Melania has said before in an interview that she has her own opinions, and from what we're learning about this speech that Melania will give from the Rose Garden, that this speech has not been vetted by the West Wing, that it's all coming from the East Wing and the White House. What are your thoughts about that?
I'm really curious if Melania is going to buck the trends of this evening and actually identify the 178,000 Americans who have died because of the coronavirus pandemic. Our country leads the world in our death per capita, and it frankly has not been discussed. Tonight, instead, we've been seeing a lot of commentary around cultural grievances and canceled culture. And I'm not sure how any of those grievances translate into actual policies or governance, especially as we find ourselves in the greatest economic recession since the Great Depression. We find ourselves no better off with the coronavirus pandemic in response. And we also find ourselves not only dealing with racial reckoning that has been made top of mind again with what happened in Wisconsin, but climate change. We see wildfires in California and other types of natural disasters, including hurricanes in the South. So I'm curious if Melania is going to discuss any of these things.
So, Sonja, I think we'll start with you. You were looking for that to be mentioned somewhere in the RNC, and Melania did address it. What are your thoughts about how she handled that topic?
Yeah, just exactly as I hypothesized, Melania, as the First Lady, was the only big voice tonight at the RNC to mention the coronavirus pandemic. With her mention of that, she also started to talk about the opioid epidemic and said it was invisible, that it knew no bounds based on race, ethnicity, or where someone lived. And I thought that that was going to be another segue to the coronavirus pandemic, because that is so often how this disease is being characterized. Yet she shifted very quickly. And what I noticed tonight was that it's as though the RNC is making it seem like the coronavirus pandemic is past tense, that it's beyond us. And I want to make something really clear, which is that this is not just an election about the White House, but control over Congress. This is not a focus on the flyover states. This is a battle for Orange County, which up until 2018 was California's red curtain, and the Republican Party lost to Democrats in 2018 midterms. This is also about important seats in Arizona, like the U.S. Senate seat, where Senate candidate Mark Kelly is trying to unseat the gubernatorial appointee who had lost to a Democrat, Kristen Sinema, in 2018. So I think that the RNC cares about control over Congress, cares about control over the U.S. Senate, yet I don't know that the messaging tonight is really appeasing those voters, particularly women voters.
Speaking of Mitch McConnell, let's talk about his absence here at the RNC. We'll start with you, Sonja.
I mean, I think this is really important and indicative of where the party is going. They are essentially caving to support Donald Trump and what the Trump administration and the Trump family want out of a convention versus focusing on down ballot, focusing on a platform. Again, the Republican National Committee voted unanimously to adopt the platform from 2016. One may say that that is efficient, yet our 2020 is completely different than where we were 4 years ago. We have people that are battling a public health crisis of global magnitude. We have unemployment at rates that are higher than ever seen in contemporary history. We see natural disasters and rising temperatures, including two of the worst wildfires in California history just this month. And all of that is absent. So one of the things that's important is we need not look further than the 2018 midterm elections, where the Democratic Party wiped out Republicans in key traditionally red states. And that was a referendum on Donald Trump. That was the issue that voters went to the polls and they said, we want our health care. We don't want a tax on the Affordable Care Act. We want good jobs. So 2020 is going to be another opportunity for voters to have a referendum on Donald Trump. That doesn't make his colleagues in the Congress and also down ticket ballot colleagues for the party in a good position. Yeah, lots of hypocrisy. We saw a naturalization ceremony performed by Donald Trump as we see families and kids being separated at the borders. Ban on Muslims, public charge rules, and undermining of the U.S. Census. We also saw identity politics from the Republican side as to why Black voters need to support Donald Trump. And it is just very confusing, and I'm looking forward to tomorrow night.
All right, Sonja Diaz, Matt Klenk, thank you for your time. We'll see you back here tonight for the news at 10. Sonja, as you know, an enormous opportunity for the president tonight to appeal to moderates and independents who may well decide this election. What do you see?
I see an attack on VP Joe Biden. We've already heard about how many years Joe Biden has been in Washington, D.C. That seems to be a talking point that the RNC has adopted. The other one being that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are anti-law and order, which is absurd for many reasons, one of which Kamala Harris has spent her entire career in law enforcement, absent her time in the U.S. Senate. I also expect Donald Trump to talk about the economy, but I wonder if there's going to be any nuance to all of the Americans who are having trouble during the coronavirus pandemic. I'm also wondering if he will follow suit of Melania Trump and actually acknowledge all of the lives that have been lost due to the mishandling of the pandemic. Finally, I think that Donald Trump and the RNC are not campaigning for control of Congress. You know, Orange County and many other Republican seats are up for grabs in California, as are toss-up seats across the country. And there doesn't seem to be a lot of talk about Congress. I know we had Mitch McConnell today. Mitch McConnell is not a supporter of the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. He's not a supporter of fair policing, and he has been wildly successful in placing white men to the federal judiciary.
Sonja, I'll open the floor. Your reaction to what you heard tonight.
Yeah, you know, it was a very long speech, and it wasn't until the last 5 to 7 minutes that Donald Trump actually started talking about what a plan for re-election may look like and what he would do policy-wise. Even then, it was pretty sparse. One of the things to contextualize this is that Trump is behind in the polls. Trump also, across his presidency, has never went above the 50% threshold in terms of approval ratings, which are really important for understanding Americans' support or disdain for a president. Now, with the speech, there was another focus on the terror that would subsume this country if VP Biden is successful. And I want to note that both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party have a similar talking point, which is that this is the most important election of our lifetime. And then to follow that up, that the election will determine whether or not America survives. Now, from there, there's clear divergences, but what both parties are saying is that there is a horror to be known to everybody if one candidate wins over the others. For Donald Trump and the Republican Party, they are losing a lot of support from key Republicans. We saw a bit of this in 2016, but former staffers of Romney, of McCain, and of other Republican heavyweights have come out and endorsed VP Biden. We also know that the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, longtime supporter of the Republican Party, is bucking tradition and supporting a lot of Democrats running for Congress. So the party is at a crossroads. I don't know that that crossroads got narrower after Donald Trump's acceptance speech tonight.
We want to take a look at some of the things that he said throughout the hour-and-a-half speech. It was mostly about two philosophies, two agendas. He hit hard on Biden, as you would expect, as they did in the DNC, hit hard on Trump, and talked a lot about what the unrest is, the unrest that's happening across the country. Let's take a listen.
At the Democrat National Convention, Joe Biden and his party repeatedly assailed America as a land of racial, economic, and social injustice. So tonight I ask you a simple question. How can the Democrat Party ask to lead our country when it spends so much time tearing down our country?
Your thoughts on that part of his speech? We'll start with you, Sonja.
I think that it's fascinating. This has been in conservative news for the big portion of summer. What's interesting about Donald Trump is he's never made mention of George Floyd. He has made little mention of police misconduct and instead has used the righteous anger that we're observing across the country, not just in our urban cities that are democratically controlled, but elsewhere. The movement for Black Lives has been the largest movement in American history around protesting. We are seeing what is occurring in Wisconsin, and frankly, it's devastating. Nobody should be killed in front of their children less than 7 feet away from a police officer. And so Donald Trump is not making mention of that. We saw VP Pence yesterday make mention of law enforcement officers killed in the line of duty. This is really important. It is a dangerous job. No one is arguing about that. But the actual instance that VP Mike Pence made was a right-wing person who killed a law enforcement officer. So it can't go both ways. We can't see neo-Nazis in Charlottesville, Virginia, being able to exert and engage in First Amendment freedom of expression while also violently hurting other people, and then see mothers, children, grandmothers in Portland, in Wisconsin, and Los Angeles do the same thing, but be met with tear gas or weapons of mass destruction. So it is a really important frame. It's not new to this country. This is akin to the frame that we've seen in the late 1960s, but it's rare to have the actual president of the United States using this instead of other types of surrogates.
Matt, as you heard tonight, the president drawing a nexus between danger.
To both of you, your final thoughts. Sonja?
Yeah, there's no... The nation is divided. I think that was clear from last week's DNC convention and the RNC convention today. Throughout Trump's speech, we only heard mention of the coronavirus as we've heard it from this party, which is that it arose from China. We haven't really got into the meat of how it's impacted families, the Americans that have been lost, the people that are out of jobs, and the work that we need to do to restore safety, even amidst a conclusion that we need to be reopening schools. I don't know how that's going to play with white female voters across this country, but I'm at a loss. It has been an interesting evening.
Matt, was it a successful message from the president?